I knew I should have brought premium whiskey to the office. The morning Garrett Thorne strolled into Nexus Corp like he had personally invented capitalism. He waltzed through the revolving doors wearing that smug Wall Street grin they hand out with every overpriced Master of Business Administration degree. And when the elevator dinged open, there he was already talking about optimizing internal synergies to the receptionist, like she gave a damn. I watched from the back, quiet, clutching my coffee like it was a holy relic. He did not notice me. Of course he did not. Guys like Garrett never do. Not until the fire starts consuming their tailored suits. The elevator ride to the 27th floor felt like a hostage situation. Garrett was holding the whole cabin captive with his booming voice, explaining that he was a massive fan of lean operations. He was talking about how corporate structures needed to be dynamic and fluid, using phrases like tackle alignment and execution efficiency. He clearly did not realize that everyone in that crowded elevator had been keeping this defense logistics company running while he was still getting rejection letters from firms with actual standards. They were experienced veterans who had worked through system outages and tight government deadlines, while he was just a kid with a shiny new degree. Then came his favorite punchline. "I cannot wait to meet the legacy staff." He chuckled with all the smug grace of a toddler holding a lighter near a gas leak. That was me. I was the legacy staff. I had spent 15 years as the head of operations, quietly building the logistics pipelines that kept our corporate gears turning. By the time we hit the 27th floor, he had name-dropped 3 different consulting firms, botched the pronunciation of synergetic, and called our founder Walter Vance by the name Wanda instead. I stepped out first, took a long sip of bitter, burnt coffee, and exhaled slowly. I already knew how this corporate story would play out, or at least I thought I did. What I did not expect was the surgical efficiency with which our new chief operating officer, Audrey Miller, reassigned my responsibilities. "We are revolving your role," she said during a brief meeting in her glass office, looking at me with the cold eyes of a private equity auditor. "We see you more in an advisory capacity moving forward, focusing on the long game." It was classic corporate speak for please go die quietly in a corner while the new kid takes credit for your life's work. I smiled, said thank you, and nodded like a bobblehead at a tax seminar. Then I walked back to my office, shut the door, and opened a fresh manila folder. I labeled it Garrett Thorne Paper Trail. I slid in a printed email chain I had been copied on for 2 years, documenting our system audits. That was the day I stopped trusting our cloud storage and started using my desk printer like it owed me money. Garrett moved quickly. Within a week, I was removed from every strategy email thread I had once created. My corporate calendar was blanker than his resume. He reassigned 2 of my top operations analysts, real talent who kept the daily pipelines stable, telling them they would have more upward visibility under his direct leadership. They looked absolutely shell-shocked. One of them mouthed a silent apology to me as he packed up his ergonomic office chair. I did not fight it. I did not beg. I just bought a new encrypted flash drive, backed up every critical pipeline, contact sheet, vendor chain, and investor note I had curated since the year 2008. I organized the files by deal stage, labeling everything down to the date of each contract version. People think corporate revenge is a loud explosion. Mine was a whisper, 1 kilobyte at a time. Garrett swaggered into our Thursday executive sync with a slide deck he did not write, making jokes about how we used to do things. Every sentence had the oily sheen of someone who thinks speed equals intelligence. I took detailed notes not on what he said, but on who laughed at his terrible jokes. The final straw came when he called my work foundational, but dated during an acquisition preparation call. He said it with a wide grin right in front of the junior staff. "Elena Cole has laid the groundwork," he smirked, pointing at me. "Now we build the future." I stared at the screen so long I started seeing spots. Then I closed my laptop, turned off the light, and sat in the dark for 20 solid minutes, breathing through my teeth. Legacy staff, that was his label for me. I would show him what legacy really means. I would show him that you do not delete the person who built the foundation of your company without watching the roof collapse on your head. My experience was earned through long nights of dealing with international supply disruptions, while he was still practicing buzzwords in front of his bathroom mirror. I was not going to let a career climber tear down 15 years of dedication just to add a bullet point to his professional summary. I was going to let him climb as high as he wanted, because the higher he went, the harder he would eventually hit the ground when the supports were pulled away. It started with the calendar invites. One by one, they disappeared like cockroaches under a kitchen light. First, it was the Thursday morning finance sync, gone. Then the internal buyer readiness huddles. The ones I used to run. Now I could not even see them on my screen. Garrett must have revoked my visibility line by line, like he was chiseling my name off a corporate tombstone. Then came the real blow, our secure network. I logged in Monday morning to upload a revised vendor sheet, only to see a red banner across my monitor, access denied. You do not have permission to view this file. I emailed the IT department, and the reply was a masterclass in corporate cowardice. Access to strategic growth folders is currently restricted per request from Vice President Thorne. No apology, no explanation. It was as if I had been erased from the system by a man wearing a polo shirt and loafers. I read the message twice, feeling a cold, calm certainty wash over me. The IT technician, a young man who I had personally helped transition to a full-time role last year, was clearly terrified of Garrett. He had even added a private note at the bottom of the ticket. "Sorry, Elena, my hands are tied on this one." I did not blame him. In a corporate environment, survival is the first instinct. I deleted the ticket notification and focused on my next move. Garrett did not announce any of this publicly. That would have taken actual courage. He operated in the dark, fast and greasy enough to squeeze through the cracks. He started holding preparation meetings without me, taking the lead on presentations I had spent 9 months developing. Then I noticed my junior team, 2 analysts and a business development associate, were suddenly all looped in on logistics initiatives I had never encountered. I caught one of them in the break room, rehearsing a presentation slide he clearly did not build himself. When he saw me, he flinched like I was holding a weapon. "Vice President Thorne wants the reporting streamlined," the young analyst mumbled, staring at the floor. "He says centralized leadership is key during these transition stages." I nodded slowly. "He is right," I said. "Just remember who taught you what centralized operations actually mean." That night I stayed late, waiting until the office was dead silent except for the janitor's cart squeaking past human resources. I cracked open my fireproof desk drawer and pulled out a stack of printed binders I had not touched in years. Contracts, email threads, and version histories of our entire acquisition roadmap. They contained the initial scoping notes, the detailed client feedback from our first discussions with the parent firm, and the specific regulatory compliance forms we had filed to secure our operating licenses. I did not just have access to the bones of this deal. I grew the skeleton. By 11:47 in the evening, I was 6 cups deep into lukewarm coffee and halfway through printing out a 202-page vendor proposal that still had my initials in the footer. The printer started whining under the weight. I whispered to it like an old friend, telling it we still had work to do. I did not rage. I did not stomp into anyone's office. I took that fury and poured it into filing tabs, timestamps, and color-coded highlighters. Garrett thought he was deleting me, but all he was doing was forcing me to build an offline archive that was untouchable. And then I remembered Walter Vance. Walter, who once told me in a back hallway during a corporate retreat in the year 2015 that I was the only reason he still trusted this company with 7 figures. Walter now sat on the board of the parent firm that was looking to absorb us. I had not talked to him in over a year, but I still had the private email address we used to troubleshoot vendor disputes off the record. I dusted it off and drafted a message. The subject line was Supply Chain Continuity Legacy Escalation. The body was brief. Walter looping back on archival pipeline structure per prior ownership. I have the original materials and version logs confirming if continuity clauses are still under your review. I signed it with my first initial. I read it 3 times. No names, no traceable attachments, just enough detail to get his attention. I hit send. Then I sat back in my chair staring at the screen. Garrett had the keys to the kingdom, but I had the blueprints, the contractors' names, and a very quiet door out the back. I knew that Walter would immediately understand the situation. He was not a man who allowed junior executives to play games with multi-million-dollar logistics transactions. While Garrett was busy setting up meetings to congratulate himself on his new title, I was quietly aligning the real decision-makers who held the power to decide the company's future. The silence of the empty office was comforting, a stark contrast to the loud, empty promises that Garrett had been making since his arrival. I packed my printed documents into my leather briefcase, locked my drawer, and walked out into the cool night air, confident that the trap was set. I knew something was coming. The moment Garrett swaggered into the Monday leadership sink wearing that cologne that smelled like cheap ambition and desperation. He sat at the head of the conference table like he had been born there, not parachuted in 6 weeks ago by a chief operating officer trying to impress the board with fresh blood. "Before we dive into metrics," Garrett said, smoothing his tie, "I want to share a quick update on the acquisition alignment presentation." He tapped the remote control, and the television on the far wall blinked awake. My stomach dropped. There, in all its plagiarized glory, was the pipeline architecture I had spent 9 months crafting, presented as his own framework. He had changed the font from Calibri to Arial, stripped my custom color coding, and slapped a new title on top. Optimized Buyer Funnel Third Quarter Expansion by Garrett Thorne. He even left the small formatting errors I had intentionally left on slide 12 to see if anyone was paying attention. But the bones were mine, down to the staggered rollout sequence and the red-flagged vendor risks on page 14. This is what I will be walking the buyers through. Next Friday, Garrett said, smiling, as if he had just solved world hunger. Elena will be supporting from the side, as she has been instrumental in our foundational work. Supporting from the side. He looked right at me when he said it, and that smirk was the kind given by men who have never been confronted by a woman with more receipts than a tax attorney. I nodded back, calm and controlled. I said nothing. I did not need to intervene. After the meeting, I slipped into my office, locked the door, and opened my encrypted flash drive. I created a new folder, Acquisition Original Materials. I dragged the leaked presentation deck into a folder titled Plagiarized Materials. I made side-by-side comparisons, PDF timestamps, and email trails proving my authorship. Then I opened my email and drafted a message, saving it in my drafts. Subject: Intellectual Property Ownership and Deal Flow. The body read, "Please find attached timeline and file metadata showing authorship lineage for acquisition architecture stored under private credential vault." I did not send it yet, because Garrett thought the battlefield was the boardroom. He did not realize I had already moved the war underground. The worst part was watching my own team pretend they did not see the theft. The same analysts I had gone to bat for, now sitting silent while a haircut and a suit rewrote my legacy in bullet points. But that silence was not permanent. At 2:13 in the morning, my private email pinged. It was a message from Walter Vance. No subject line, just a file attachment named Transition Clause version 3 draft, and a note beneath it. "They kept your original language, thought you should know." I downloaded the file, decrypting it using the old passphrase we had set up back in the year 2016 during the logistics merger, Ghostwood. The document opened to page 4, paragraph 7. There it was, my words and my structure. Operational transition shall proceed in accordance with the pre-existing continuity plan, barring disputes of authority. I read it again. Then I clicked into the body of the paragraph and added a single sentence. In such cases, executive continuity will fall to the most tenured operations lead, effective immediately upon dispute recognition. I did not make a power grab. I just wanted the deal safe and the company intact, things Garrett was incapable of doing. I removed all author metadata, re-encrypted the PDF, and sent it back to Walter. No signatures, no trace of Elena Cole. I closed my laptop and leaned back. Somewhere in a skyscraper 3 time zones away, Walter would read that sentence. He would know exactly what it meant, and he would not say a word because men like Walter did not need explanations. They just needed that clause to exist quietly, like a fire escape nobody noticed until the building caught fire. The next morning, Garrett burst into the weekly meeting like a prom king who just found out the crown came with stock options. The team applauded his empty promises. I smiled and tapped my pen against my notepad. They did not know the deal had a heartbeat because I had kept it alive behind the curtain. They did not know that beneath the spreadsheets, a single sentence now sat, coiled in the legal structure, waiting for the right moment. And when that moment came, it would be written in 12-point font at the bottom of page 4. The quiet anticipation was better than any public confrontation could ever be. I watched Garrett gesture wildly as he described the future of the company, knowing that the foundation he was standing on was already starting to slide out from under his feet. He was so focused on the upcoming presentation that he did not even bother to check the final files being prepared for the buyers, assuming his victory was already guaranteed. He was blinded by his own ambition, unaware that the board was already reviewing the modified contract draft with the updated continuity language that I had quietly returned to Walter. You could smell the tension before you even stepped into the room. That sterile, over-conditioned hotel conference air mixed with the sweaty desperation of men trying to justify their titles. Everyone wore expensive navy blue suits like armor, clutching their coffee cups. This was the final acquisition meeting, the ultimate showdown. I took my seat near the far wall, not at the main table, but near the coat rack, between a large plant and a silent speakerphone unit. I brought no laptop, just a small, unlabeled manila envelope resting beside my folded hands. Across the room, Garrett held court like he was auditioning for a role in a movie he did not understand. He paced as he spoke, his voice loud enough to drown out any nuance. To reiterate, he said, clicking to a slide that looked like it had been made by a design intern. We have streamlined operational continuity through vertical integration. The deal is locked, and the transition will be seamless. We own the operations side, and we control the transition. He flashed a smile at the buyer's lead counsel, Diana Hayes, a woman with a legal mind built entirely of razors. She was wearing a tailored charcoal suit, her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, and she sat with her hands folded over a thick binder. She did not smile back. She just tilted her head, watching him like a scientist observing an insect. She had spent her career dismantling overconfident corporate officers who thought they could bluff their way through audits, and it was clear she was not impressed by Garrett's presentation. I do have a question, she said, her voice cool and sharp. Section 7 references a continuity clause. I would like clarification on that language. Garrett waved his hand dismissively. That is standard boilerplate text, he said. It does not affect the buyer's rights. All transition authority routes through my office. The legal team knows that. He did not even glance in my direction. Diana looked over at me. I did not move. I just placed one fingertip on the edge of my envelope. Garrett was still talking about synergies and value acceleration, dropping corporate jargon like he thought it would buy him credibility. The lead investor, Walter Vance, sat at the far end of the table, silent and watching. As I was saying, Garrett continued, spinning the slide remote in his hand. We have pre-aligned all department heads. There is no ambiguity on who is steering the ship. That is why I have taken point on this transition. The slide behind him showed an organizational chart with his name glowing at the top. My name was completely gone, erased like a typo. He thought nobody would notice. He had even added a new box for himself, titled Chief Optimization Officer, as if the board had already approved his self-written promotion. I watched the junior analyst, who was sitting 3 chairs down from me, try to keep his eyes fixed on his notepad. He knew the org chart was a total fabrication, but he was too young to risk his paycheck by speaking up. I gave him a small, reassuring nod, letting him off the hook. Diana turned a page in her binder slowly. Walter leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. That envelope beside me was still untouched because you do not have to raise your voice when the words are already signed. You do not need to interrupt a man who is busy digging his own grave. Just quietly hand him a sharper shovel. I glanced around the room. Our chief operating officer, Audrey Miller, was stiff as a board. Our financial officers were pretending not to sweat through their collars. Garrett was still going. The point is, he said, clapping his hands together, this deal runs smooth because I have simplified the handoff. We have alignment, we have vision, and frankly, we have control. That is how we do things at Nexus Corp. He smiled, and then right on cue, he delivered the exact line I had waited 3 months to hear. Do you know who I am? The room stopped breathing. Diana Hayes was mid-sentence, parsing a clause with the precision of a surgeon, when Garrett did the thing I knew he could not resist doing. He interrupted her loudly, waving his hand. Look, he said, his voice rising with that unearned confidence. Do you know who I am? It was a challenge thrown out because he had cornered himself. The room froze. Diana's pen paused. The junior analyst stopped chewing his pen cap. I slowly reached over, picked up the manila envelope, and pulled out a single matte black business card. It read, Elena Cole, Executive Advisor of Operations Continuity. I slid it across the table to Diana. She picked it up, turned it over, and then looked up at Walter. Walter did not say a word. He just leaned back, his lips curling into a smirk. Then he turned his gaze to Garrett. Actually, son, do you know who she is? The question hung in the air, heavy and loaded, turning the room into a vacuum. The confidence drained from Garrett's face so fast it was almost comical, replaced by a sudden, creeping realization that the script he had been reading was not the one everyone else was following. He looked from Walter to Diana, then back to the card, his fingers twitching as he struggled to find something to say in the sudden silence. The silence that followed was absolute. Garrett blinked, and for the first time since he joined Nexus Corp, he had nothing to say. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Diana Hayes gently placed my business card down on the open folder. She flipped a few pages, finding the execution copy of the contract. Her voice was calm but deadly. This name matches the signature metadata embedded in our earliest contract drafts, she said. You would not happen to know how that language got in here, would you? Garrett looked down at his folder, flipping pages frantically. Walter Vance just chuckled. Sit down, he said, his voice quiet but final. Garrett sank back into his chair, his face turning pale. Diana read the text of Clause 7B aloud. In such cases of a dispute of authority, executive continuity will fall to the most tenured operations lead, effective immediately. Garrett stammered, claiming this was not in the draft. It is in the signed copy, Diana replied, sliding the document across the table. The one with the ink still fresh, my clause, my words, my signature. Garrett looked at Audrey Miller, but the chief operating officer did not look back. Walter Vance finally spoke. I believe that satisfies the legal concerns of the board, he said. Under Delaware corporate law, specifically the precedent set in Gantler versus Stevens, corporate officers owe an absolute fiduciary duty of loyalty and candor to the corporation. This is not a suggestion, Mr. Thorne. It is a strict legal requirement. By plagiarizing Elena Cole's proprietary operational architecture and representing it to the buyers as your own creation, you committed a material breach of fiduciary duty. In Delaware, corporate officers are held to the exact same high standards of fiduciary care as members of the board of directors. You had a strict duty of candor to provide completely accurate operational information to our investors, and a duty of loyalty to act in the best interests of Nexus Corp at all times. Instead, you engaged in self-dealing, misrepresentation, and outright plagiarism, exposing this transaction to extreme contract cancellation risks and legal liabilities that could have cost this company millions of dollars. Under our corporate governance guidelines and the explicit terms of Clause 7B, this clear dispute of authority triggers an automatic reassignment of all transition power. Therefore, all executive authority over this acquisition is immediately transferred to Elena. Garrett opened his mouth to object, but Walter raised a hand, silencing him. We appreciate your time, Mr. Thorne, but this meeting is now under Elena's purview. He looked at me, and I nodded once. I reached into my envelope and handed Diana a slim binder containing the original, timed logs of the operations pipeline. She took it, flipped to the first page, and smiled. That was the moment the power shifted completely. Diana turned to Walter. We would like to proceed with the transition under Elena's direction, effective immediately. Walter nodded. We will honor that request. Garrett jolted forward. You cannot just switch points mid-meeting, he protested. This does not make sense. Walter did not look at him. He turned to Diana. Is there any risk to the transition? None, she replied. The documentation is much tighter under Elena. That sentence landed like a blade. Garrett looked at Audrey Miller, desperate. Audrey, say something. You brought me in for this. Audrey did not say a word. She stood up, walked behind Garrett's chair, and picked up his company tablet. She gave a soft nod toward the hallway, a silent command for him to leave. Garrett froze, then looked at me. I met his eyes calmly, showing no emotion. Diana spoke again, confirming they would proceed with me as the sole liaison. The translation was simple. They were done pretending Garrett was the adult in the room. Walter leaned forward. We are investing in stability, not noise. That was the final nail. Garrett stood up slowly, his shoulders sagging, and looked down at the table. He had never built anything here, he had just borrowed the spotlight. And now, the spotlight was mine again. Garrett walked to the door, his hand on the frame. "You did this," he whispered, looking back at me. I let the silence stretch for a moment, letting the weight of his failure settle. "I wrote the playbook," I said, my voice calm. "You just read the headlines." His mouth twisted, but he had nothing left to say. He turned and walked out. The glass door slid shut behind him, sealing off his corporate career with a soft, final click. The room was quiet for a second, the tension slowly dissipating like steam from a kettle. Nobody spoke his name again. It was as if Garrett Thorne had never existed, just a temporary distraction that had passed through our offices. Walter stood up and handed me a dark folder containing a formal invitation to join the Strategic Advisory Committee, reporting directly to the board. I sat down at the table, surrounded by the contracts I had designed and the clauses I had written. I did not gloat. I just felt peace, the kind that comes when you outlast the noise and become the silence that follows. I was ready to lead. All thank you to the legends of the old office days. Subscribe to keep the switch flicking chaos alive. Your ex-boss is shaking in their loafers.